we have an intangible self that's somehow separate from our body? What are the assumptions that have come to underpin our modern understanding of psychology? And is the soul just a relic of the past? Okay, Mateusz, do you want to start by introducing yourself to the viewers?
Yes, I'm Mateusz Stróżyński, and I'm a professor of classics and ancient philosophy at Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań, in Poland. And my main field of study is ancient Neoplatonism, both pagan and Christian. But I'm also working on medieval philosophy and mysticism, and also the later reception of Neoplatonism. And I'm also a psychologist and psychoanalytic psychotherapist.
Can we start with there's a quote from Aristotle that sounds quite surprising given our way of understanding the world, where he says, the soul is, so to speak, all things. Now, how did the ancients understand the self or the soul or the mind?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. And we cannot take Aristotle as a representative of everyone in antiquity. Of course, he was a philosopher living in the 4th century BC. But it seems that people in antiquity had a very different way of looking at the world, human mind, human consciousness, and human experience of the world. And also, I believe, and here I follow the British philosopher Owen Barfield, that it wasn't just that they had different ideas about what consciousness is or what the world is. They had a different experience of reality, and Barfield believed that our experience has evolved in time. The way the mankind experiences the world. So in antiquity, people seem to experience a certain connection with the world, or even a unity, in a way that sounds very strange to us at times. So I think when Aristotle says that the soul is all things, he, in a way, on the one hand, he expresses this sort of ancient way of feeling reality and experiencing reality, but he also gives an intellectual explanation or an intellectual metaphysical framework to that experience, and from his point of view, it's not that the world is out there and I'm here. So I'm not looking at the world as a separate object that I can observe and study. There is no separation between the soul and the world, but in a way, the soul becomes whatever we experience or know, both in our sense perception. Aristotle believes that when I see a tree, I become a tree in a sense. Or when I see a river, I become a river. And if I understand the tree, I understand the river, then I also, in a much more profound way, identify myself with it. So it is in this sense that the soul is all things, by knowing, by perceiving, by experiencing the world. Although Aristotle tends to be very, very down to earth. So he says, well, obviously it doesn't mean that if I see a stone, the stone is actually inside my soul. It's not a dream, it's not a hallucination. The stone, the material stone, is existing independently of my soul. But when I know this stone, the reality of this stone is somehow present in my soul. And it is in this sense that he says that, we are everything in a way.
And when you say that he represented and provided a sort of way of expressing the experiences of his contemporaries, were there, as it were, dissenting voices? You say he wasn't representative. Were there other schools of thought in the ancient world that contradicted this?
Yes, there were materialist philosophers after Aristotle, like Epicureans or Stoics. So in their view, we perceive the world by means of images that flow to us from things. For instance, one of the views was that when I look at a tree, the tree emits a sort of a resemblance or an image of itself, which enters my consciousness somehow. So, although I think in general we can feel that there is this sense of connection which is much stronger in antiquity than it is in now or in 18th or 19th century. I would say that Platonism and also Aristotelianism, they emphasize much more the metaphysical context of this sort of the experience of a certain unity between the knowing mind and the world. Interestingly, in the Platonic tradition, Plato himself, but also in his later followers like Plotinus, there is the concept of the fall of the soul, and according to this concept, our current experience of the world, so their experience of the world as they understood it, it's not a natural way of being in the world and experiencing the world, because the fall means that something went wrong. So the way we see things is distorted. We are living in Plato says, in a kind of a dream, a kind of illusion, under some magic spell or enchantment in a bad sense, and we have to wake up from this. So in addition to this view that, the soul is all things, for Plotinus insists that because of the fall, we lose that full experience of our sort of union with the world, and the fall makes us feel separate from the world, and the fall makes us feel sort of encased, enclosed in our heads, and he sees that not as something natural, but as some kind of error in our perception.
And this thing of being encased in the heads, we talked about self and other. How did these thinkers conceptualize the relationship of the soul or the mind to the body?
Yeah, it's a problem in modern times. It became a serious problem, mind-body problem, or the consciousness problem.
Not a problem for them?
It doesn't seem that they have experienced this as such a profound problem, which would prove my previous point that although Plotinus and other thinkers, they emphasize that something went wrong and we are disconnected from reality, it's not still as powerful this sense of disconnection as it is widespread now, I think, in modernity. So in this Platonic tradition, especially in late antiquity, we can see that in Plotinus and Neoplatonists. For them, it runs against sort of a common popular view of Platonism, which is that the body is one thing, the soul is another thing. The soul is imprisoned in the body. Plato says that in some places in his dialogues, but he says also other things in other places. But this is sort of a popular view of Platonism. So our soul is unhappy, trapped in the body, in the senses. But for Plotinus and other thinkers, also Christian Neoplatonists, the body is an image of the soul. So in a sense, the soul projects the body. And so there is no...
it's sort of right upside down from how we think about it now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So today, a widespread view is that consciousness is a product of the brain, right? So the brain and the body, this is the real thing, right? And consciousness and mind is somehow less real. It's dependent on the body. It's projected by the body. For Plotinus, it was the other way around. So soul is much more real. We are much more real, and our bodies are ways we manifest ourselves, we present ourselves to each other, and so through the body, through the senses, we can interact with the sensible world, but the body is an image of the soul, which doesn't mean that if I have a brain injury, I can't have access to my mental and intellectual faculties. That was clear to them, but for them it wasn't a proof that a soul is produced by the brain. So brain injury they would understand, although they were not aware of the importance of the brain as much as we are. But for them, it would just mean that there is a break in communication between the soul and the body, but the soul is intact still.
Right. Now, Plotinus obviously is really important in the way these ideas are transmitted onwards. Can you talk a bit about how Plotinus's ideas reached the medieval West and how they were kind of modified?
Plotinus is a key thinker, and in recent decades, scholars have really come to appreciate the way he's influential. Not always directly, not always in the sense that he was read, and in this way his philosophy had an impact on other thinkers. Sometimes his influence was more implicit, but still, he lived in the 3rd century AD, so at the time where Christianity was already existing, but it was also a period where Christian philosophers, Christian intellectuals, they were trying to create Christian philosophy, because the Gospels or the Scriptures in general, it's not philosophy, right? It's the language is poetic, symbolic, metaphorical. They were aware of that, so they tried to extract philosophy out of the Bible, and they of course were reaching to Greek philosophers, because Greek philosophy was what we now would call science. That was philosophy to them. So the project of harmonizing philosophy, Greek philosophy, with a Christian revelation was basically like a project of reconciling science back then with religious experience and religious revelation. And Plotinus seemed to be particularly useful for them. Plato, of course, and Aristotle a little bit less so. But Plotinus, who synthesized Plato with Aristotle and other philosophical schools of antiquity, he was particularly he was congenial in a sense in his way of looking. That's why Saint Augustine, when he read Plotinus's treatises in Latin translation, he was fascinated. It helped him to convert to Christianity, because in Plotinus he thought he found a metaphysics that could be very easily Christianized. For him, there were very, very little differences between Plotinus and the Christian experience and Christian revelation. And other church fathers, like the so-called Cappadocian fathers, so Basil the Great, Gregory of Nyssa, Gregory of Nazianzus, they were also aware of Plotinus, and they were using his ideas, his way of thinking, to create a Christian metaphysics, Christian philosophy.
What was it that was so congenial in Plotinus's thought to a Christian metaphysics? I mean, in your paper you talk about, there's a lovely image of these mirrors. Can you explain how that worked so well for the early church fathers?
Well, Plotinus believed, like many philosophers in late antiquity, that all reality comes from one principle, the first cause, which can be called God, but Plotinus called into the one or the good. So this one principle creates or makes reality, and reality is hierarchically ordered. So in a way, reality is an image of the one for Plotinus. So this was something that Christians thought, well, it's completely we can easily harmonize this with the biblical revelation, but what they really liked was Plotinus's use of the concept of the image, because in the book of Genesis there is this the famous statement in Genesis chapter 1 verse 26 that God made man in his own image. And so Christian authors, they felt it was a momentous statement, and they used Plotinus's understanding of what image is to elucidate the meaning of this. But for Plotinus, we can maybe talk in a while about the soul as an image. But for Plotinus, the entire universe, the physical, sensible universe, is an image projected or created by, fundamentally by the one, but through the mediation of other beings. So Plotinus believed that from the first principle arises something which he called intellect, but he also said it's being. So being and intellect, or being and consciousness, are for him the same. And out of this, the physical universe is made as an image of it. So we have a hierarchy of images.
It's created, not simply reflected.
It's created, not reflected. Well, it depends on how we understand the word creation, because Plotinus uses a word in Greek, poiein or poiesis, from which poetry comes, which means to make. And Christians believed it's in the Greek translation of the Bible, the same word is used for the creation of the world by God. So I don't think there is a big difference between what Plotinus would call the making of reality or projecting reality as an image, and Christian understanding of creation. So, and again, a couple of decades ago, philosophers tended to believe there is a difference between creation and so-called emanation, but I don't think it's valid. In any case, in Plotinus and also in these Platonic church fathers, the act of creation is really an act of reflection, of reflecting. So, for instance, Plotinus says that nature, in the sense of the universe, it's like a mirror image of the cosmic soul, because the cosmic soul is a sort of a intermediary being or principle through which God makes the physical universe. So he says the universe is like many mirrors in which a single face is reflected. So when we look at nature, sensible universe, we see a mirror reflection of a spiritual reality. And for Christians, it was a good way to describe the creation of the world.
I think you mentioned Nicholas of Cusa in this context, who has a...
Yeah, he's a much later philosopher. It's the end of the Middle Ages, the 15th century, but he is in that Christian Platonic tradition. And although he didn't read Plotinus, because Plotinus was translated into Latin only, he was translated into Latin in antiquity, but it was lost. Augustine read this, but others, but the Latin West in the Middle Ages, they didn't have access to this. Marsilio Ficino, Italian philosopher in the 15th century, he translated entire Plotinus's corpus into Latin, but Nicholas of Cusa, he didn't read that. So, but he had the same image. So he says the universe is like a single face, the face of God, reflected in the mirror of nature, or in many mirrors. So this metaphor, you can find it in the tradition. Plotinus was probably the first one who used that image. But you can find it in antiquity, you can find it in the Middle Ages, and then it's gone.
Well, we'll get on to its vanishing in a second, but go back to Augustine. One of the fascinating things in your paper to me was you say, actually, there was something that looked a lot like an idea of the unconscious back then, the idea that there could be drives and desires and thoughts which were unavailable to our conscious mind. Can you talk a bit about how that played out and how these early church fathers understood that?
So again, we have to first talk about Plotinus a bit, because Plotinus, I think we can say that among philosophers whose writings we really possess from antiquity, Plotinus was the first one who spoke about the unconscious in such a clear way. Plotinus says that what we are conscious of, what we are aware of, is just a tiny part of what we are and of what reality is. But his idea was that, so because of the fall, our awareness sort of shrank. So we see a fragment of reality. Reality is very rich, it's multi-layered, and we just see only one layer of reality. He says it's like someone standing in water, so our feet are covered with water. So what is underwater is the physical universe. So vast majority of vast. So the bigger part of reality is completely outside of our awareness because of the fall, says Plotinus. But so on the one hand, what we are not aware of, what is unconscious for us, is our higher self. So our soul, our intellect, the part of us which is the image of God, we are not aware of this. We think we are the body. We think we are bound to the universe. But he also said that what we are unconscious of is what is below our soul. So desires, impulses, which come from the body, from below, they can reach our consciousness. Of course, I can be aware of my desires, impulses, but I can also have, says Plotinus, desires that I'm not aware of yet, or
startlingly modern idea.
Yeah, so we can see it as a sort of as sandwich, although it would be a very weird sandwich. So there is the unconscious, the sub-rational, sort of subhuman unconscious with blind impulses, irrational impulses. On top of that, we have our ordinary consciousness. And above that, we have a huge, vast realm of the spiritual unconscious or the divine unconscious, however we want to put it. And we don't have a clue about that.
It's not one, but two unconsciouses.
Yeah, so there are two unconsciousness. This is Plotinus. And Augustine added to it, well, he accepted this, of course. So Augustine believed, for instance, that every one of us, we experience God, but we are not aware of this. So he was puzzled by this, because Augustine said, if we didn't have any experience of God, we wouldn't be able to understand the word God, because when you hear the word God, you refer to some kind of inner experience you associate with this word. If we had no experience of God, we wouldn't be able to communicate about God. So he believed God is in our unconscious, so to speak, and through spiritual exercises, prayer, meditation, we should get access to it. But also, Augustine elaborated on or developed the idea of the sub-rational unconscious, which is in Plotinus. And he used for this purpose a scriptural text, Psalm 19. In Psalm 19, the author of the psalm, he speaks about hidden sins. So he prays to God to reveal to him, to cleanse him of his hidden errors or hidden sins. So Augustine said, well, clearly the Bible says that there are things in our soul which we are not aware of, and very serious things like sinful thoughts, sinful desires. So Augustine invented something which sounds like a religious or philosophical psychoanalysis, because he believes that we can know ourselves only through dialogue with God, which he called confession. So confession for Augustine is that I'm trying to reveal myself, to disclose myself to God in dialogue, but through this process, it is God who discloses myself to me. And Augustine believed that what we come to realize about ourselves is horrible. So he has this image in the Confessions. He says, I wasn't aware of myself. I was like standing behind myself, looking at my back. But you, God, you put me in front of my face, which is a paradoxical image. So I could look into my face, and I saw that it was vile, it was sinful, it was hideous, it was distorted, horrible, and all of that. So Augustine sounds here very much like Sigmund Freud, in the sense that he was perfectly aware that we have many desires, impulses, thoughts, images that we are not aware of, and that's a problem, and we should become aware of that. And this dialogue with God in prayer is the only way to achieve that. While Plotinus sounds more like Carl Gustav Jung in the sense that he emphasizes this higher potential of ourself, which is the spiritual unconscious, or the super conscious, we might say, not subconscious. But Augustine, of course, he was much more and directly influential to the Middle Ages and the way of thinking in the West about that. And there is also another interesting aspect of it, namely demonology of the Desert Fathers. So it's also very, very interesting and modern in a sense. They believed that our soul is inhabited by all sorts of spirits, so evil spirits, demons, and also good spirits, angels. And so our soul, the unconscious, is populated by all sorts of spirits. And we still use that terminology, although we are not aware of the origin. Like we say, that's, we want to...
demons.
Yeah, we want to do something in good spirit, for instance. Or I can feel the spirit of this conversation or whatever. But for the Desert Fathers, so this is the 4th century AD, they really believed that inside of them, so in their interpretation, for instance, if I have an unconscious desire, a sinful desire especially, that this is not just an abstract desire. There is an entity living in me which is animating this desire. So that's why they believe that spiritual life is all about realizing these various demonic presences in our soul and fighting them and trying to resist their influence. So again, you can find it in Freud and Jung with different terminology.
But this way of thinking about the world that you describe, so radically different from our own, that doesn't conceptualize self and other in a radically separated way, how long did it last? And what was it, in your understanding, that kind of, as it were, finally overthrew it?
So on the one hand, I think that Plotinus and Augustine and others, they were right in their description of what they called the fall, so that our way of perceiving the world is not a natural, it's not a normal way. So our consciousness is limited. This is the meaning of the fall. So we see only parts, we cannot see the whole of reality. And we know it can be reversed through spiritual practice. Our awareness can expand. But the fall means that I'm focusing very narrowly. I want this, I want that. I'm afraid of this. I'm thinking about this. So our experience becomes fragmentary, and it's a universal problem from which philosophy and religion wanted to save us. So on the one hand, I think despite of the potential evolution of our experience, we have this problem. We had this problem in antiquity, in the Middle Ages, in modernity. The problem that we are obsessed with the fragmentary and sort of incapable of seeing the whole. But when we look at the history of humanity, and here I'm following the intuitions of Owen Barfield, I think there is another dimension to it. So even with the fall, people in antiquity and even in the Middle Ages, they felt much more connection to the world, as I said earlier.
Is it Descartes that brings down the guillotine?
Yeah, and so Barfield believed that in late Middle Ages, so in 15th, 16th century, this began to change, and the scientific revolution was a decisive moment, because when we started to, through the influence of the new sciences of the 17th century, we started to look at nature as an object that is quantifiable, analyzable. So inevitably, nature was no longer filled with spirits, filled with, angels and demons and the presence of God, like this beautiful poem by Gerald Manley Hopkins, the world is charged with the grandeur of God. It all disappeared because the world became a thing that we want to measure, we want to manipulate through technology. So I think this led to this experience of that we feel surrounded by things, mostly artificial things. We surround ourselves.
I guess that has an implication for the way you conceptualize the self.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we feel that our self is also a thing. So we experience ourselves more and more as a thing among things. So I think the fall was exacerbated by the development of modernity, to speak in general terms. And I think we are in the next phase of this with the machines, the AI, and all of that, because we have less and less contact with nature and with other people and with reality. So we fall deeper and deeper. Barfield believed there is a next phase ahead of us, so we can recover the ancient unity and the development of science and technology.
That was what I wanted to ask you, just very briefly, because we're running out of time. You mentioned the discoveries of 20th century physics have made it much harder to see reality as a series of kind of fixed, measurable things. Almost everything from the basis of mathematics since Kurt Gödel to the quantum theory tells us that reality is much more wibbly-wobbly and interconnected and entangled than we think. Does that mean that there's going to be room for a return to this more complex worldview? Maybe.
That's a very good point. So I think it's interesting, and of course many people see this, that the way we experience the world in sort of ordinary way now, this is something similar. I mean, our image and our feeling of reality is according to 17th century science. But it's completely at odds with contemporary science. So, I mean, and this is a huge problem, because now today culture is all about science, but people don't care about what science really discovered. So, and this is a problem of education, but it is also, I think, connected to other things, that we don't want to see the world in a new way, which is, as you said, that there are no fixed things out there. That the universe is something which we don't fully understand, but it seems much more dynamic, maybe much more alive than scientists used to think in the 17th or the 18th century, when they believed it's a clock, right? That the great image of the 18th century, the universe is a clock. Now we know it's not a clock, but we still feel it should be a clock. And we produce machines and we try to convince ourselves the machines can be intelligent. So we still are fixed on the idea of a clock, while physicists and biologists and psychologists, they tell us that the universe is, and we are, something quite different and less clear. But and the same, with the question of relationality. So that this Christian Platonic or Platonic tradition emphasizes that we are connected to other people, that to be a person means to exist in relationships, and this goes against our modern liberal understanding. We are autonomous, independent, isolated entities. But this is completely false if you look at it from a scientific perspective. From any scientific perspective, we are not isolated, autonomous entities, and we rediscover, I think, the sense of relationality, of connection. So there is a hope that in the future, science and the traditional philosophy and religion, they will come closer again. But that's just hope. Of course, we cannot be sure. But I think we have reached the zenith of this sense of separation and fragmentation, and maybe something new will come out of this.
Mateusz, thank you very much indeed.